And it's Wednesday Warriors, and it's me, Arielle. And this week I'm going to be talking about depression as an obstacle to recovery. So I want to talk about depression and how to move forward with recovery from depression when you're recovering from an eating disorder. I also want to talk about how to feel less vulnerable to eating disorder triggers, eating disorder behaviors while dealing with depression. Because sometimes depression is basically out of our control. Depression is a mental health issue in and of itself. So if we are talking about dealing with depression, it doesn't mean that we can just snap our fingers and magically the depression will disappear as soon as we become aware of it and we can just go back to focusing on our eating disorder. It would be nice if it worked that way, but it doesn't. But even if we can't get rid of depression, we can at least learn how to work with it and have it become a little bit more familiar to us and know kind of the ins and outs of how it might work for each of us. And when we can do that, that will really allow us to stop those vulnerable feelings from coming to the surface and making us falter in our recovery. So since depression is out of our control and isn't like the common cold where we have a certain duration of time that we're going to feel really, really bad and then eventually we'll feel better again, we have to look at it in a different way. And we have to really focus on the things we can control about it instead of the things that we can't. We want to empower ourselves in different ways, and that's going to look different for different people, but sometimes just recognizing, okay, this depression is really what's hit me right now. This is why I feel like I don't want to get out of bed. This is why I feel like working is an extreme chore. This is why I feel like I can't put any effort into my recovery right now. And just knowing that there is an answer, there is a reason for why you feel the way you feel is empowering. And then when you have all those recognitions and you're able to use them to empower yourself, even if it's just a statement, even if it doesn't do anything actively, even if you don't feel proactive, that can come later. But after you've done that and you've become more self-aware of the depression aspects, then you can get started on working it into recovery from an eating disorder, and you can kind of build on it, and you can kind of mash the two together. Because the thing that happens a lot when someone is dealing with depression and eating disorder recovery, they are seeing the two things as separate. They're seeing depression in one hand, eating disorder in another, and they're juggling them. I have to heal from depression and get better from that, and I have to also heal from my eating disorder. And people look at it very black and white. They look at it very separate. But the two are often very, very connected. Now, this is going to, again, look very different for very different people, but probably more often than not, depression is connected to your eating disorder in some way. But the thing about this is I'm not proposing some magic recipe for getting rid of the depression and the eating disorder in one fell swoop. What I'm saying is look at the depression and the eating disorder as related, linked, connected in some kind of a way instead of as two separate problems, two separate issues. They are, in some ways, separate problems, obviously, but they do have their connections and they do have their pieces where one fuels the other or one hinders the other. And when you think of yourself as I have a problem I need to work on, or I have some issues I need to work on, instead of I have depression and I need to work on that, and I have an eating disorder and I need to work on that, it becomes less overwhelming. So that's what I'm really asking you to do here, is to think about your depression and your eating disorder sort of as wrapped up and just saying, I have some stuff I need to work on, or I have a problem, instead of thinking about them separate from each other, because it becomes very, very overwhelming when you start thinking of all the different things that you have to work on. Just think of it as one big thing. You're working on you. You're working on you right now. And the next thing that you want to do is ask yourself some questions. I'm a big self-questioner. I think that we forget to ask ourselves questions a lot. We are often asking society questions. We're asking other people questions. And we forget that we can ask ourselves questions. We need to ask ourselves some things. We need to really get in touch with what we are feeling and why we're feeling the way that we're feeling. So one thing you want to ask yourself is, what are the keys? What are the links between my depression and my eating disorder? And when you can start naming some things that have that connectedness, you're going to be one step ahead in order to keep working on everything. Because if you know that when you're feeling a certain way dealing with your depression, you're also going to start being triggered by a particular thing in your eating disorder, or it's going to affect your appetite, or it's going to affect your eating habits, or it might even affect who you want to eat with. Those are things that you need to remember, think about, sort of file away in your head so that you know that they exist, and those keys and those links are very, very important to you getting better. I think another important question you want to ask yourself is my depression a direct result of feeling overwhelmed by my eating disorder recovery? And I think this is an important question to ask yourself if you didn't really struggle with depression prior to having an eating disorder, or prior to being in recovery from an eating disorder, let's say. And if you may very well have a true and real depression diagnosis. That's not what I'm saying. But if your depression has sort of come to light while you've been in recovery from an eating disorder, maybe there are some very real facets to that have to do with you feeling drained and overwhelmed when you're actually working on getting better from the eating disorder itself. And that can happen because you're doing a lot of work, there's a lot going on, there may be a lot of people involved, you might feel very helpless, and you might feel like you are not doing things quickly enough, and you might not feel like you're doing things the right way, and there are a lot of comparisons involved with eating disorders, and there's just a lot of stuff for everyone. No matter what eating disorder it is, no matter who you are, or how old you are, or what your gender or sex or anything is, it's important to remember that recovery can be really, really overwhelming, and sometimes it can be really, really sad. Especially if you are starting to deal with maybe the root of your eating disorder, or you are in therapy and maybe you're starting to delve into some things that you didn't really talk about before. When things are being brought up that you had hidden before, even if those things aren't traumatic events and they're just aspects of yourself that you had been hiding, and now they're coming out, it can be very, very sad. It can be very, very emotional. And sometimes when we're not ready to deal with those things, we can go into a depression. And that's what I'm asking you to look at. I'm asking you to think about whether that is part of what's happening with your depression. Because if you can recognize that, it's going to be like a light bulb goes on, and you're just going to feel so much better that you know that, okay, that's part of the reason. And you're going to feel more empowered just having figured that out. It's not going to solve anything. The depression won't magically go away in the morning, but knowing a little bit about where it comes from is really, really cool, because it gives you a little bit of power. You get some power back, and you can start the next day knowing about the direction in which you want to go. I want to talk now about those thoughts that sort of come from out of nowhere suddenly that seem to kind of knock the wind out of you. Maybe you're having a really great day, and then all of a sudden you're just washed over, like a wave of depression has happened. And that can be really hard, because you might have been doing really, really well, and you were really proud of yourself, really confident, things were going great, and then just for no apparent reason, you have a wave of depression. And how do you deal with that? So keep in mind that these waves of intense depression and sadness can be very chemically based. They may not have anything to do with your circumstances, your surroundings, anything that happened in your day, or anything you said or did. Depression is very chemical, and you just can't help it that that wave crashed into you. And it does really hurt, and it is really terrible and hard to deal with, but you have to kind of let go of whatever anger you might feel at having that ruin your day. Because sometimes, even when we don't intend on it, the anger is somehow directed at ourselves. Instead of being angry at the depression, the chemical imbalance or the chemically charged reaction, we get mad at us, we get mad at ourselves, and that doesn't really serve any purpose. If you didn't do anything wrong and everything was going great, and then all of a sudden that depression wave crashed into you, what's the point in getting mad at you? It's only going to fuel that huge wave of depression that already started. Sometimes, as much as you might not like this answer, you just have to go with it and get yourself to a safe place, whether that's your house or your room or wherever it might be, and call someone. You might have to call someone that you don't really love calling, like your psychiatrist or your therapist, but sometimes a sudden wave of depression or sadness can mean that something is going on biologically or chemically that you might need a little bit more help with. It really may be completely out of your control. Maybe there was a shift with your medication. Maybe you're not handling a medication well. Maybe you need to try a new medication because it stopped working the way it should be working. Maybe you just need, a different dosage or something like that. Maybe this has nothing to do with medication and you need to talk to someone because there is some way that they can help you and that's what they've been trained to do. Sometimes it's just about taking positive action. So that positive action might be to try to meditate, might be to take a nap, might be to call a friend, might be to call your doctor, might be to call your mom. Whatever that positive action is, however small, the very act of doing something does something to us that is good. And is it going to solve all your depression woes? Of course not, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. I did a video a few months ago about self-awareness, and I will post the link to that. I hope you'll check it out if self-awareness is something that you struggle with. It can be really good with just laying things out step by step and letting you know how to ask yourself the right things and sort of call yourself out on things and being ready to face certain things. And you can use that video on a small scale or on a larger scale, and it doesn't really have anything to do with depression, but it can be useful in dealing with depression. And then the last thing that I want to quickly talk about is a decreased appetite or even an increased appetite when you're dealing with depression, because we know that depression affects the way we eat. It affects our appetites. Sometimes we just don't feel like eating. Sometimes we eat more because we think it might make us feel better. And sometimes we maybe eat less or eat more because it's a sort of self-punishment. There are so many different reasons why we do what we do, but a lot of our appetite issues do have to do with depression, and that's one of the ways in which eating disorder recovery and depression are linked. They are connected. Even if the reason you're not eating well has to do with the depression and the depression is the cause, it's still a link to your eating disorder recovery. So you have to note that. You have no choice but to note that. And don't think of them as two separate things. Think of them as one thing melded together that you now need to deal with. I know it might seem like a cop-out answer to those of you watching this video, but there is no beautiful, magical video that's going to help you with all of your depression problems and all of your eating disorder recovery problems that are related. The best advice that I can give you is to seek out a professional who is local to you, who can help you, who can tailor a plan for you specifically, for your life, for your needs, for your specific depressive episodes, and for your eating disorder recovery, because let's face it, there are so many different points of eating disorder recovery. Some people are here, some people are here, some people are here, some people are here. Some depressive episodes last a very long time, some don't last very long at all. Some depressive episodes are seasonal, some don't have anything to do with that. Sometimes, as I was mentioning earlier, the depression fuels the eating disorder, or the eating disorder fuels the depression, and they go back and forth. And it's just unfair to you for me to give a very cut and dry video response of how to help yourself when there is no one recipe for every single person. And I would be doing a disservice to pretend that there was, or to insinuate that I somehow had all the answers for your problems with depression and an eating disorder. So it's really best for you to seek someone out that can help you. And it's important that you do this if you do feel like you're hopeless and lost and the depression is getting the better of you, because if you've put some effort into eating disorder recovery, you owe it to yourself to keep going with that and not to fall back into old ways and old habits. I hope you have a great week, everyone. I'll see you next time.